Hey guys, so what I want to talk about real quick is overall draft strategy. A lot of people are asking, Mr. Linsley, you're not giving us any sleepers or, any dark horse players, whatnot. Let's be clear. You shouldn't be trying to draft a sleeper unless you're in the late rounds. You want to stockpile players that you're pretty confident are going to be starters and or at worst like a third receiver on a good team. Maybe a tight end that you're not quite sure if he's going to be the starter, but you like what he may have to offer. Or those running backs, aka the handcuffs. So these are things that we need to think about going forward. When you're drafting, be clear on what you're drafting and where your spot is. If you're in the later rounds and you see what you think are the top 5 running backs and the top 3 quarterbacks, and we probably know who these guys are, I don't have to mention them, then start looking at the top tier receivers. Or if you still see a running back there that you like and you grab him, and then coming back in the snake drafts, coming back right there, you're not in love with, say, the receivers that are right there, and you're like, should I take this guy here or should I take another running back? I say take another running back. Best player available. We hear this a lot in the regular NFL draft. We hear this from the guys at ESPN, Matthew Berry, Hasselbeck, these guys. You do it. Force somebody into a trade in your league. Maybe somebody then they feel later on down the line that they do not like their receiving core. And they're in a PPR league. And they have more receivers than they want, but you have all the running backs. And a couple of their receivers we've seen after week 1 or 2, it looks like they're the starters and they're putting up numbers. Go ahead and send out a trade. See what you can't do. Rattle a cage. There's some really different types of trade strategies also. One thing I like to kind of do is talk somebody into how much of a better deal it is for them than it is for me. Let them know, like, man, you can plug in both of these guys, you're getting a 2-for-1 or whatever. Be persuasive, get it going. Don't just sit back and hope that everything pans out. Draft according, look at your roster, watch the first few weeks of the season, look at a couple guys who might have started out 0-2 to look to hit the panic button early. Jump on it. If you also have, say you got a couple backs, like I said, you're again loaded at running back, package a couple of them. If you have Mark Ingram and someone has Darren Sproles, and they're maybe interested in one of your receivers, to sweeten the deal, tell them you'll send Ingram over if you want to get back, a certain player off their roster. So a lot of different things that you can do here to really improve your team. One thing I see in leagues constantly, people aren't willing to pull the trigger. This won't win you a title, folks. You got to be aggressive with your drafting, aggressive with your trade offers, and you got to pay attention a little bit too. Don't just sit there and look at your draft room while players are going off the board and see where they're ranked and that's who should go next. If it doesn't match up with who you've already drafted, you need to be very careful there. So that's just some basic overall drafting advice from Mr. Linsley. Like I said, I have no problem playing what I like to call the battery. Like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, whenever Chris Johnson was a rookie, Lendell White, I believe, Lendell White was still there. So I got Chris Johnson in the 3rd round this year. People were like, who the fuck is Chris Johnson? What are you doing, moron? Well, in the 4th round, I drafted Lendell White. I drafted no other running backs that year. I played them both as a batter. Yes, Chris Johnson, I definitely kind of panned out and I lucked out a little bit. But Lendell White had 12 touchdowns on the season, 10 in like the first 8 weeks. And Chris Johnson was just racking up yardage. So by playing them both, I didn't lose the touchdowns from Lendell, and I got all the yards and receptions from Chris Johnson. They brought me a championship that year. So I call that playing a battery in your backfield. You can kind of do the same thing with receivers. Like say it's your bye week. If you have Calvin Johnson, grab a Nate Burleson or Titus Young off the waiver wire. Play them together, just see if you get the most production. If Matt Stafford goes for 430 yards and 3 touchdowns that week, yeah, Calvin's probably going to get his, but maybe that's the week where Burleson or Titus Young, get that 100 yards, get 5 receptions, and a toucher. So it's one way to kind of strategize, week to week what you want to do. If you're not loving like the other running backs out there because you're like, oh, I don't really know about D'Angelo Williams, is he the true starter? Reggie Bush, like these are guys that are going to be there because you think they're the #1. Take 2 backs on one team that you feel like the team puts up a lot of points or yards, or at least moves the football. They have a better offense. Just, take a risk there is all I'm saying. Try it out and see what happens. So that's just a little bit of fantasy drafting advice from Mr. Linsley. Use it if you want. If you don't, kiss my ass. I don't really care, because if you were in my league, I'll probably be able to tear you apart on a week-to-week basis. But again, I'm a champion. It's kind of how I roll, as the kids say. And I like to think outside the box. It's just one of the things I do. So, you know, in a PPR league, you know, one thing you can do is with drafting receivers, obviously load up on guys that you feel like are possession receivers, or guys that are definitely a strong number 2, and therefore when you're trying to, you know, pull off that trade, you have a throw-in. Just some ideas. Use them if you want. Again, if not, you know, that's your own call. But just a little advice here from Mr. Linsley Sports Report.